Thank you everyone so much for joining. Today's Collegial Conversations with Diana Clark is talking about the whole person's strategy for wellness. We have with us Michael Gillis, who is the Executive Director of the Pointe Malibu. And I'm just going to pass it off to Diana and Michael. Thank you.
Thank you, Sydney.
Thank you.
And welcome, Michael Gillis. It's great
Thank you so much.
to have you on this show. So when I think about, we haven't known each other in depth over these years, but we've known of each other in depth over these years. And when I think about your involvement in this world of mental health and whole person wellness, I think you've probably, because of the duration of your experience, gone through many iterations and phases of what that would look like. Is that true?
That's absolutely true. Now I sound like a dinosaur.
Well, I'm sorry, but that's called experience and wisdom, and I want to tap into
strength
that.
and hope. Yes.
There we go. So let's start. What was your first experience with this world we call treatment or rehab or?
Well, back in 1990, I started working for Spofford Hall, which was a Metaplex facility, and it was located in New Hampshire. And I was doing their community outreach work for them in Boston. And along the way, I met a lot of clinicians, and I had this affinity for talking to social workers. I just found them so interesting, and they work systemically, which is my orientation as a social worker, my training. And I just thought that through my own personal recovery and my educational background, I found treatment centers fascinating, and I saw people being helped and getting well, and I wanted to be a part of it.
I can see that. I mean, substance use disorders are one of the few mental health disorders where you can see almost immediate shifts in people. It's a really exciting miracle to witness. Whether those shifts sustain is a different story, but
Right.
that real awakening can happen in the treatment program.
It's wonderful when you see the lights go on, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. So in 1990, and I've been in this field, not quite then, but pretty close to that, the zeitgeist, the modalities, everything about treatment was different than it is today, I think.
Correct. And we've come a long way, and we needed to come a long way.
We did. Tell the people who haven't been around that long in this field what it was like if you, in 1990 and 1980s, if you went to a 28-day treatment program, also called a dry out or whatever it was.
Or yeah, well, there was a differential between psychiatric facilities and substance abuse oriented facilities, and never the twain shall meet.
Never meet. In fact, education didn't even meet.
That's correct. So through the advent of Alcoholics Anonymous, back in the 1930s, early treatment centers were born. They were all 12-step based. Everything was the disease model. Mm-hmm. People could hit over the head with a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, whether they needed it or not. And the whole idea of co-occurring disorders, that was all delayed through someone's primary treatment experience. Well, they'll deal with trauma, they'll deal with their depression, they'll deal with those other more mental health oriented things post-treatment. And moving forward to today, if you don't treat co-occurring disorders, the likelihood that someone can maintain any type of abstinence is slim to none. So we've come a long way.
Yeah.
And we needed to. It became professionalized.
Yeah, no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
So what I was about to say was that the field of addiction treatment or co-occurring disorders treatment has become professionalized, and people need advanced education in order to practice. But early on in the industry, where somebody had sobriety and they may have had a certificate or what have you, they were practicing as full-fledged primary therapists. So if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Speaking of hammer, back when I first started doing this work, hammer was the tool used. We
That's
used
right.
confrontation methods, bam, serious boundaries, bam. There
Right.
was much more of, I think, even in the treatment world, a shaming that went on. Did you
That's right.
experience
That would
that as
start with
well?
the intervention process. So people would go in and do a hardcore intervention, snatch the identified client and whisk them off to a treatment center. And that process itself was traumatic. So then someone lands in a treatment center and you're spending the first 2 weeks of the treatment process undoing what was just done to them before they could even start to absorb information.
Yeah. So I understand that interventions absolutely have a downside and a real purpose. If somebody is going to be dying of a heroin overdose, spending 2 weeks in undoing that intervention, great. But I do think there are interventions that can be used even in a surprise way that are much more caring than
Yes,
confrontive.
it's more of an invitational model.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's better to have a willing participant, or even if they're reluctant, to have a smoother transition into the treatment process.
Right.
And there are people today that are doing amazing interventions, and many of them are doing interventions having a background or a context for co-occurring disorders, meaning co-occurring mental health disorders in addition to the active addiction. And they understand that as a context, particularly as it relates to trauma, which is so key.
Right. I did get a call the other day about an intervention, and it was with somebody with real paranoid psychosis. And I was like, no, that's not appropriate. It will feed into their paranoia. So we have to be, in the same way treatment has gotten more nuanced and sophisticated about how we deal with the underlying disorders, I think interventions have as well.
Yeah, agreed. There's a parallel process happening.
Yeah, it's great to see.
It's wonderful to see.
So what else are you seeing happening in treatment and in, just supporting people with long-term chronic disorders like a substance use disorder that's different now than it was even 10, 15 years ago?
Well, for me, having a background in social work, the training was always systemically oriented. So you're always treating the identified client in context to a system. So it's their environment, it's the family involvement, oftentimes the referent involvement, which is key. And then through clinical practice at Pointe Malibu, we've really expanded on holistic services.
And what are they for those of us who don't live in California, Michael?
Right. Well, John Kabat-Zinn was a miracle worker, and he started with mindfulness and MBSR early on back in Massachusetts, I believe at UMass, outside of Worcester, and working with people with terminal medical conditions. Many of those folks were folks that were battling cancer and that sort of thing. And he really took this Eastern approach, mindfulness, meditation, and things outside of pharmacology to treat people and give them actual skills to self-soothe. So it was more of an Eastern approach. And what we learned over the years was that's just so key to having people be able to self-regulate, have a tool so that they actually feel better. And then through DBT, mindfulness was brought in through an evidence-based model, and initially was treat a condition called borderline personality disorder. And then early on, I was running Life Skills South Florida, and we were an evidence-based residential program early on, and our folks all had advanced training with Marshall Lenehan's training institute called Behavioral Tech. We really saw that model also really worked well with people with a history of substance abuse, particularly the mindfulness and meditation practice. And so what I've done over the years, working through treatment centers, prior to joining the Pointe Malibu, I was in the cabin in Chiang Mai, Thailand, which is a Buddhist country.
Right.
So if they don't learn it, they just live it, right? So we've got Westerners that are studying it and practicing it and that sort of thing.
That's
to be
great.
in a Buddhist country where they just live it was amazing. So what we've done at the Pointe Malibu is really added a huge holistic approach to the treatment services that we're offering. So we've got our psychodynamic, we've got our evidence-based work, we've got holistic work, and we do things like surf therapy. But what they're using is a DBT approach while people are out there in the ocean, really getting them connected to themselves, help themselves soothe, and using mindfulness and meditation practice. We do Qigong, we do acupuncture, we do massage, sound bowl healing. Those are a number of the things that we institute.
That wasn't at Spofford.
No, there was definitely not at Spofford.
What was at Spofford? What was at Spofford?
It was a 12-step model, like
That was it, though.
like all the models back then that were doing addiction treatment work. There was 12-step oriented, and then what happened? They started doing family work, which was really key in a number of treatment centers. So they started moving things forward. They weren't just treating the symptom, putting a Band-Aid on it, and sending people back out the door. The family component to treatment is just, if you don't do that, you've missed the whole point.
Right.
The idea that you could treat an individual, put them back into the same system, which didn't have a shift or a change,
Right.
the likelihood they could maintain the gains that they made that residential treatment experience was slim to none.
I put up my hand just then, and for those of you who have seen me do this before, it is like this. This is what the family or the organizing system looks like. You take this guy or woman and they go off to treatment and they're doing all this work, and these people are sitting here doing exactly the same thing with the same bone structure and the same sinew. And this person, if they come back into the system at the end of that 30, 45 days without any shift here, what happens?
Nothing changes.
Nothing changes.
Nothing changes. And the families are in a lot of pain.
Yeah.
They often don't see how they contribute to the problem. And you need to look at things like transgenerational trauma.
Okay. Can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean by that?
Sure. Well, transgenerational trauma, people may grow up in a home where there's mental illness, a chronic medical condition, addiction. They may be trauma survivors in that they were immigrants. Things like the Holocaust and genocide in general, when people survive that, they go on to have their families directly impacted by those life experiences. And oftentimes there are maladaptive coping patterns that come up through that sort of trauma and survival, and that's passed on to the next generation. So unless you sort of know that and meet the family where they're at and have more of an understanding of their context to the world, it's really, really difficult to talk to them in a thoughtful way with interventions that are going to make sense that they're open to.
And I also think that makes perfect sense, the generational trauma, but also just in terms of culture, right? Yeah. You know, imposing our Ayn Rand, sense that people adult and leave and never come back to family or whatever is not necessarily the cultural norm for lots of people.
And you need to know who speaks in the family system as far as you're dealing with non-Anglo, non-sort of middle class American that have been acculturized to their present day status. You're dealing with families that have otherness. One of the books that I absolutely love and I still think is relevant is Monica Mcgoldrick's book on ethnicity and family therapy, which was written by people from various cultures that were doing clinical work. And they would talk about systemically who speaks in the family, what's important. Do people stay within the family system? Do they go out? If they go out, what's that mean? What's their reflection on the family?
Mcgoldrick. I'm going to write this down.
Oh, it's a fantastic book. Monica Mcgoldrick, she's a PhD, and there's a second edition. It's called Ethnicity and Family Therapy. I think if you're working with cultures other than your own, if you don't have that at your disposal, you've missed the boat. It's not like reading a horoscope, but it gives you more of a context for the individual and family that's sitting in front of you, how to speak, how to engage, what's important, potentially what their background is that brought them into the current environment.
I made the mistake. I absolutely made cultural mistakes during my era of doing interventions, walking into a very traditional immigrant Greek family, and their cultures bespoke that men did not leave the home until they got married. And so when I talked about treatment and then the idea that he would not come home after, they looked at me like I had landed on Mars.
Correct. And that's very common throughout the Mediterranean cultures.
It wasn't an appropriate piece of advice. The appropriate piece of advice would have been, let's take this culture, let's get you healthy enough so that when he comes back in.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
But
so
I didn't know that early on. I didn't. Yeah. I had to learn through a bunch of faux pas and goof ups and apologies.
Yeah. And often, I think they're doing it more now. They're teaching that or using that particular piece of material at graduate level, maybe undergraduate, I don't know that, but I was exposed to it through my experience at Boston University School of Social Work. And it's one of the most valuable things I took away from that training experience. I just love that book.
Great. I'm going to own it here shortly. As soon as we hang up, I'll be ordering it. So what else is different? Spofford Hall, 1990, the Pointe, 2021. Yeah.
Well, we view people through the lens of co-occurring disorders because that's really what's presenting. By the time someone needs inpatient or residential treatment experience, they're fairly complicated. It's usually secondary to a mental health or trauma-related issue. So you need to be able to work with that as a primary as well. So you're going down a path where you're treating both the mental health and the active addiction piece concurrently so that people get what they need.
Right. So while you're knocking out that maladaptive crutch of a coping mechanism called substance use or whatever else they use maladaptive, we're building a different crutch so that they have the capacity to leave, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
Crutch is a bad word, but structure.
Yes, absolutely. And you're really educated. I mean, the identified client comes in and they don't have the awareness. They don't understand why they do what they do. So if you can, through psychoeducation, help them understand what their process is, how it's not working for them and not working for family and not working for the employer, and you give them key points, they get a big sigh, a big relief. And then you can start working with people, giving them skills so that they have tools in their toolbox. When they leave treatment, they've got something to lean on and practical skills that they have to help manage, particularly through self-regulation.
Right. That makes sense. So before we, sort of wrap up, I have questions about if you have family members listening to this today, because we do have an audience of people with family who they're struggling. At what point do you say, this isn't going to work at home? At what point? What's your advice on that?
Well, the interventions that happen early on, meaning clinical interventions, whether it's through a pastoral counselor, whether it's through a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, the earlier you can catch somebody in their process, I think it's better. And I think we're educated now. We have much more knowledge, and interventions that happen earlier in the process versus prior to a crisis are really effective.
Got it. Yeah, that's good advice. That's good advice.
But also with that context and understanding of why somebody's stuck. That's why I don't like to pathologize people, but why they're stuck. And then you need to give them the awareness and the skills, etc., and the family as well to help get unstuck and to keep the train moving out of the station through the recovery process.
Right. I don't even often use the word stuck. I just say the status quo isn't working. I'm much more, even if we have underlying disorders, I don't necessarily use the diagnostics. I will say, you have Michael's disease, and Michael's disease includes the need for recovery from substance use disorders, anxiety, which we can deal with, the, whatever it is, that symptom bucket, but we're looking at all the symptoms at this point.
Yes, and that's the holistic component. So you have specific holistic treatments, which I had referenced, but you need to look at the whole person in context to their system, living in the world, what's working for them, and also coming from a strengths perspective.
Right.
Not pathologizing someone, the symptoms that they're presenting with, but also looking at their strengths, because you need those, and they're going to need those to hang on to in order to move forward, to sustain the recovery process.
And expand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is that me?
No, it's me.
Okay.
I can't do anything about it.
I know, I can tell. All right, so audience, we're going to acknowledge authentically that there's a funny thump in our.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I
Do
do
you have
apologize
questions?
for that.
No, that's fine.
There are workers on site today, and of course they're outside my window.
It makes me want to dance.
Wants to know if I'm playing the drums.
Are you underneath your table?
I don't have a musical bone in my body.
No? Oh.
They're outside. There are workers outside my windows where I'm sitting, and I can't really intervene at this moment.
Great.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I totally get it. So any last questions or comments or anything about treating people holistically? What I heard today was we have to take them inside the system of their family or organizational system. We have to take that system inside the culture. We have to take that culture inside and wrap the family around that.
Yes.
And then look at the whole person inside all of those things and treat that generationally.
And give the identified client and their families tools to use. So I much like the analogy that you gave with the hand. And sometimes I think it's like like a mobile. You take a piece off the mobile, the whole thing shifts.
Yeah.
And readjust in order to find balance and equilibrium. And working with families and clients through the treatment process is very similar, because people are always looking for homeostasis.
Always, yes, even when it's not good. So we have one question here I'm going to read. It says, how involved do you think families should be in treatment facilities?
Well, I think you've got multiple stakeholders. First of all, you've got the identified client, you got the people that are referring the individual to treatment, you have the family. So if you don't do the family work, you've missed the point. You have two clients. You have the identified client that's in treatment, and then you get the family. And families are in pain. They don't understand. They're frustrated. They're angry. There are lots of things. And they have oftentimes maladaptive behaviors themselves. So you have to go in and work with that family at the same time you're working with the client. And if you don't do the family work, again, you've missed the whole point of the treatment process.
I absolutely agree. When I first started in this work, I was surprised and disappointed and would only refer to programs that had their own family program. And then I saw the gap and developed one, but you know, because I saw that I could do an intervention. I could work with this family. I could start the process of having them look at themselves and the ways they contribute to the status quo and all of those things. But unless somebody was continuing that work, it wasn't going to go forward. And it needed to be the treatment program.
So we do things specifically at the Pointe Malibu. We have an identified family therapist. The client has identified primary therapist. We do that work concurrently as they move through treatment. So practically what that looks like is that we do a family assessment. We do genograms, which are important both for the client and for the family. And then the families themselves are getting weekly family therapy sessions in addition to the case management component. And oftentimes we refer families out to their own resources so they can start doing their own work as well. And then we bring people in for a 2-day clinical experience called Family Weekend, where the families come in with specific things they want to work out with the client has specific issues they want to work out with the family, and hopefully it culminates in a continuing care plan that everyone's signed off on. That makes sense.
I like that. That's a great approach. Great approach. All right. I think we have covered the whole person care for today. I thank everybody for joining, and we will be back again next week on Collegial Conversations. And Michael,
Can I put a plug into the Econo Professional Group?
you sure can. I don't do it.
Okay. So I've known Arden for years. I've known Diana for years, and a number of folks that are involved working directly with clients. And you do work systemically. You're terrific to work with. You work with complex families, complex clients, and you really get what we're talking about. The whole conversation that I was speaking about was something that you folks do as well. So it's really a pleasure to know you professionally and also work with you, with individuals and families.
Oh, thank you, Michael. You made my day.
Doesn't go unnoticed.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right, I'm going to end on that note. I love good feedback. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm looking forward to hearing how your development at the Pointe in Malibu goes, because we know we're all changing.
That's right. You gotta keep growing.
Keep growing and changing. In this world, particularly in this field of substance use disorders, behavioral health, and mental health, we know more now than we will know, than we knew 10 years ago. And 10 years from now, it'll be very different still. And I'm excited about that.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on.
Joining us. You're welcome.
Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day. Sydney.